Welcome, everyone. You're at the fiscal year 23 Connect and Protect Law Enforcement Behavioral Health Responses Solicitation webinar. Just to allow for some sign-ons after the hour, we'll get started in about 1 minute. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I know we'll have some people that trickle in a little bit after the hour, but good afternoon. Thank you for joining today's 2023 Connect and Protect Law Enforcement Behavioral Health Responses Solicitation webinar. Today's webinar is focused on the Connect and Protect Behavioral Health Solicitation. My name is Aisha Delaney-Brumsey. I'm the Director of the Behavioral Health Division at the Council State Government's Justice Center. I'll be moderating today's webinar, which is funded by the U.S. Department of Justice's Bureau of Justice Assistance, or BJA. Next slide. Just to give you a quick overview of what we'll be covering today, I'm first going to introduce the speakers. Then we'll give an overview of the different organizations who you'll be hearing from today, BJA, the Council State Government's Justice Center, and then we'll give an overview of the Connect and Protect program. After that, we'll discuss the award information, budget, application criteria, the submission requirements, and then we'll leave time at the end for question and answers. At any time during the webinar, you can ask a question by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and entering your question there. This includes both technical and content-related questions. We'll try to reply to technical questions in the chat window as we go. For the content-related questions, we'll keep a running list and address them at the end of the webinar. And we will do our very best to get through as many of those questions as possible. If you do encounter any technical or audio problems during the webinar, please click on the links that were just dropped in the chat box. And sometimes, of course, there are some technical issues that we may not be able to resolve, but we are recording this webinar and we'll post it along with the slides by the end of next week. So even if you aren't able to hear us live, you will be able to hear us there. And just one finer point on that, this is different from some other Zooms that you may be on. There is a Q&A box and then also a chat window. If you can put your questions in the Q&A box, that helps us track better than just seeing in the chat box. But of course, we'll go back and forth. If we see a question in the chat box, we will do our best to answer it. Next slide. So just to introduce the speakers, in addition for myself, you will be hearing from Maria Fryer, who is the Justice Systems and Mental Health Policy Advisor at the U.S. Department of Justice, BJA. She oversees the Justice and Mental Health portfolio, which includes Connect and Protect, and she works with the Council State Government's Justice Center on this program to assist states, local government, and behavioral health organizations to better understand the relationship between the criminal justice system and mental health populations, and to help create policy and programming that meets the needs of municipalities and the citizens they serve. Ms. Fryer previously worked at the North Carolina Governor's Crime Commission, where she advised the governor's office on effectively addressing the needs of victims of violent crime. In addition, she worked in community corrections and served in the United States Army. In addition, we have Tammy Lovell, who is the State Policy Advisor at BJA. She manages the Connect and Protect program, and prior to joining BJA, she worked as the law enforcement lead for the Maryland State Administering Agency, as well as the Governor's Office for Crime Prevention, Youth, and Victim Services. And finally, we have Ernie Stevens, who is the Deputy Director of Law Enforcement at the Council State Government's Justice Center. Within the Justice Center, he focuses on improving outcomes for people experiencing behavioral health conditions and homelessness who encounter law enforcement. Previously, Ernie spent over 28 years in the San Antonio Police Department, and he also worked as a program manager for the Southwest Texas Regional Advisory Council that oversees emergency operations for 22 Texas counties. Thank you. Next, we will provide overviews now of the Bureau of Justice Assistance, the Council State Government Justice Center, and then also the Connect and Protect program. For the next slide, I'm going to turn to you, Maria, to talk about the Office of Justice Programs.
Great. Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. My name is Maria Fryer, and happy to be here today with all of you. So a little overview about the Office of Justice Programs and where the Bureau of Justice Assistance sits within that organization. So the Bureau of Justice Assistance is located, as I said, within the Office of Justice Programs, OJP, and OJP provides a wide range of services to the criminal justice community in the form of grants, training, technical assistance, and research. Although our focus today is on BJA funding opportunities, there are other OJP offices, such as those shown on the right side of the slide, and these offices offer additional grants and programs to support our shared public safety mission. Next slide. So BJA's mission is to provide leadership and services in grant administration and criminal justice policy development to support state, local, and tribal justice strategies to achieve safer communities. BJA works with communities, governments, nonprofit organizations to reduce crime, recidivism, and unnecessary confinement and promote a safe and fair criminal justice system. Specifically, BJA provides funding to support law enforcement, combat violent and drug-related crime, and combat victimization. And through the development and implementation of policies, services, and sound grant management, BJA strengthens the nation's criminal justice system and restores security in communities. Next slide. So here you see our director, Director Moore. And Director Moore was appointed by President Biden in February of 2022. And he serves as BJA's lead programmatic in the policy efforts through our office and providing a wide range of resources, including training and technical assistance to law enforcement, courts, corrections, community-based partners, and others to address chronic and emerging criminal justice issues and challenges nationwide. And on this slide, you can see the offices within BJA that are under his oversight. Next slide. There are 5 major focus areas at BJA, and you can read more about the 5 primary strategic focus areas here at BJA, many of which relate directly to the work and grant programs that BJA administers. These include a strategic focus on building trust and ensuring effective criminal justice systems, reducing recidivism and unnecessary contact with the criminal justice system. And of course, the utilization of evidence-based strategies and increasing ways to increase program effectiveness and ensuring organizational excellence. Next slide. So we strive to fund, educate, equip, and partner. And here you're viewing key approaches that BJA takes to accomplish objectives in their strategic focus areas. Many of these strategies are put into action through grant programs such as the Connect and Protect program. So thank you so much for your attention on these overview slides. I'll hand it back over to Ernie.
Thank you, Maria. Appreciate it. And welcome everybody from the Council of State Governments Justice Center. What I'd like to do is just give you a little bit of background about the Council of State Governments Justice Center, who we are and what we do. The Justice Center is a national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that helps communities across the country improve justice system processes so that they may be more fair and equitable to everyone. We combine the power of membership through association representing state officials in all 3 branches of government, with the expertise of a policy and research team focused on assisting others to attain measurable results. Our staff, scratch that, our awesome staff, develops research-driven strategies to increase public safety and strengthen communities. And the reason that we are on this webinar introducing ourselves today is because we will be the technical assistance provider for the Connect and Protect grantee program. Next slide. As you can see here, this slide describes a little bit more about the work and the style and how we strive to reflect the Justice Center core values, which include a commitment to being independent and nonpartisan in every aspect of our work, providing rigorous, trusted, high-quality analysis, developing practical and innovative solutions informed by data and research, and promoting collaboration, building consensus, and being inclusive and respectful of diverse views and experiences. Next slide. As you can see here, Connect and Protect is a grant program that is designed to help law enforcement and behavioral health systems work together to improve public health and safety responses and outcomes for people with mental health conditions of co-occurring mental health and substance use conditions. Through this grant program, the BJA is seeking applicants to design or enhance law enforcement behavioral health response to people with mental health disorders or co-occurring mental health substance use disorders who come into contact with law enforcement. These programs, such as, but not limited to, crisis intervention teams, co-response teams, law enforcement assisted diversion, and the homeless outreach team, and so much more. Next slide. The Connect and Protect solicitation is one of two solicitations that are out right now from the BJA under the Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program, or the JMHCP. While Connect and Protect focuses on helping law enforcement partner with behavioral health and other health and social service partners, JMHCP focuses on helping other parts of the criminal justice system, such as the courts, the jails, and community corrections, work with their behavioral health partners and others to improve outcomes for people with behavioral health needs. While today's webinar focuses on Connect and Protect solicitation, we just wanted to make sure that you were aware that this solicitation is also available and that you can see more at the link in the chat. Next slide. As you can see here, these are 6 questions that are part of the Police Mental Health Collaboration Framework. This is a resource designed to help law enforcement executives and their teams implement high-quality, partnership-based interventions to improve responses to calls for service of people with mental illness, mental health diagnoses, or co-occurring substance use conditions. This resource, along with the PMHC Toolkit, are a great place to start to learn more about these types of initiatives as you're preparing your application. We encourage you to learn more about the links in the chat. Now I'll turn it back over to Aisha. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ernie. So now I'm just going to go ahead and turn this back over to Maria, who will begin to give us more. Oh, sorry, I forgot to turn my camera on. Who will give us more information about the Connect and Protect Award, including the application criteria and submission requirements. So Maria, to you.
Great, thanks again. So thank you to you, Ernie, and just we'll continue on and get into the actual solicitation. So as we've noted before, the Connect and Protect Award is designed to help communities enhance law enforcement responses to people with mental and co-occurring mental health and substance use disorders. So that's how we abbreviate. From here on, we kind of abbreviate it as, MHDs, and you'll see a lot of acronyms and things like that, but it's really referring to both people with mental health disorders, and when you see MHSUDs, it's co-occurring disorders. So we do that a lot just because it's a lot of writing. Next slide. So for the purposes of this solicitation, when we talk about mental health disorders, we are including both traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress disorder. And you may have known that already, but we're going to try to elevate and sort of highlight those 2 types of conditions. The eligible applicants for this grant are city and township governments, county governments, Native American tribal governments, and that would be federally recognized, of course, county governments, Native American tribal, and state governments and other. Next slide. So a little bit more as far as the eligibility criteria. In order to be eligible to apply for this application, the applicant must be a city or township government, county government, federally recognized Native American tribal government, public and state-controlled institution of higher education, special district governments, or state governments. There are also some types of organizations that fall into other, as I just mentioned. There is an other category when you get into the application. In this category, the other category, are agencies with a different legal status. for example, like a nonprofit or a for-profit mental health agency. But these organizations are only eligible to apply if they meet two criteria. And the first criteria is the applicant designation. They must be designated by the state mental health authority to provide services as a unit of the state or the local government. And then the second criteria is that the applicant attaches to their application some documentation to support this designation. So they've got to be acting as a unit of local government or state government on behalf of the state mental health authority, and the applicant also has to attach documentation to demonstrate this designation. If you would like to know if your entity or organization is designated as a state agency or a unit of local government to provide mental health services, call your local state mental health authority, whose number can be located on the link provided here. And I believe there's a link in the chat, and it's also in the solicitation. So I would just add here, if you are at all unsure, please reach out to the local mental health authority, especially if you're a nonprofit mental health service provider. I know that the application is very lengthy, and it takes a lot of energy to submit. So please check that out. Next slide. So I want to highlight an important point because Connect and Protect aims to promote cross-system collaboration. We will only consider applications that are jointly administered by a criminal or juvenile justice agency and a mental health agency. So this is a collaborative partnership, and the partnership must be between a justice entity and a behavioral health entity. A mental health agency is defined as an agency or state or local government or its contracted agency that is responsible for mental health services or co-occurring mental health and substance abuse services. So, and it's not just all about having a contract, but also it has to be, if you're going to apply as a mental health agency and under that other category, it also requires that specific designation that I talked about. So under this solicitation, only one lead application by any particular applicant will be considered. The other agency or agencies must be proposed as subrecipients or subgrantees. As I noted in the previous slide, the lead agency must be a city, township, or unit of local government, county government, Native American tribal government, which is federally recognized by the Secretary of the Interior, public and state-controlled institutions of higher education, special district governments, and state governments, or an organization that falls under other, as I just previously discussed, and other is its own category for application. Okay, the Connect and Protect Law Enforcement Behavioral Health Response Program. Oh, are we on the next slide? Okay. Response program is specifically designated to target preliminary qualified offenders with mental health disorders or co-occurring mental health and substance use disorders. And preliminary qualified offenders are outlined in the 21st Century Cures Act. I believe that they're also putting that citation in the chat. And if not, it's definitely in the solicitation. So the Act specifically provides that a person is preliminarily qualified if the offender has been unanimously approved for participation in the program by the stakeholder group of that community, which would include in that group the prosecuting attorney, the defense attorney, probation, corrections official, a judge, relevant mental health agency, provided that those who can make approvals as I've just listed have determined that one person that's participating does not pose a risk of violence to any person in the program or the public if selected to participate in the program. So when the stakeholder group makes this determination whether or not the target population can participate in JMHCP or Connect and Protect programs, they should determine whether to designate a defendant as preliminarily qualified. And the relevant prosecuting attorney, defense attorney, probation, corrections, judge, mental health, and all of the folks in that stakeholder group they should take into account such things as whether the participation of the defendant in the program would pose a substantial risk of violence to the community, the criminal history of the defendant and the nature of and severity of the offense, the views of the relevant victims to the offense, the extent to which the defendant would benefit from participation in the program, and the extent to which the community would realize cost savings because the defendant is participating in the program. And I know that's a lot to convey, and sometimes we just refer applicants to the 21st Century Cures Act, but sometimes it's really important to also just read through that in case there are any questions about the target population. There are some charges, some very violent charges that are where the target population would not be able to participate in the program. And if a person has been charged or convicted with any sex offense or any offense related to the sexual exploitation of children or murder or assault with the intent to commit murder, then those participants would not be eligible to participate in the program. Okay, so now we're on slide 21. We'll move into the objectives. And this year, the Connect and Protect solicitation is particularly focused on in seeking applications that address one or more of the following objectives: to design and implement a best practice program in crisis response to improve outcomes when law enforcement officers encounter people who have mental health disorders or co-occurring mental health and substance use disorders. And you can see on this slide examples of some of the types of crisis response programs that the grant can support. Next slide. All right, community responder programs. Just a little note on community responder programs as they're growing across the country. One additional note here on the types of crisis response programs that can be funded with this grant. So many jurisdictions have begun community responder programs and they are basically mobile crisis or mobile responses that deploy behavioral health professionals such as social workers, peer outreach workers, and others. And sometimes these behavioral health professionals are deployed in partnership with medical professionals such as emergency medical technicians. And community responder programs are most often deployed to respond to 911 calls for service, but may also accept calls from local crisis numbers or other referral resources. And often they can involve, sometimes when they come through 911, they can involve an alleged offense or a low-level crime or a local ordinance or something like that that requires a response. Community responders answer a range of calls, including those for people in mental health or substance use crisis, welfare checks, trespassing, and disputes. Just as I mentioned, many of these calls are just low level. The key is that they do not deploy law enforcement to these calls. And these types of programs are eligible for funding as long as they are developed in partnership between a justice and mental health agency and the justice agency. This can mean that the law enforcement agency is involved in planning the program, identifying which calls to dispatch, or other planning and implementation steps. Next slide. Continue with objectives. In addition to the examples of the types of programs this grant program can fund, there are several other objectives that this grant can support, including to plan and deliver a law enforcement agency response program in coordination with a mental health agency that includes services to improve or enhance the response. It can pay salaries as well as expenses such as training or overtime for training and coordination activities to design and implement a police mental health collaboration program. The funds can be used to engage citizens through officer outreach and education to improve public safety. And next slide. Continue with objectives. Can build positive community relations and trust through public communication strategies. The program funds can also be used to enhance officer knowledge and skills in responding to community members with mental health disorders or co-occurring mental health and substance use disorders. It can increase public safety agency capacity to develop and sustain programs by collecting data to inform practices, create stakeholder groups, and Oh, I lost my list. And collecting data to inform practices, stakeholder groups, develop policy, and encourage ongoing professional development. Seek guidance, then incorporate and build upon successful strategies for police mental health collaboration. And you all knew that. Next slide.
Maria, while you're
All right.
transitioning slides, it just sounds like a couple of folks you might be breaking up for a couple of folks. So do you mind just turning your camera off and seeing if that helps with your audio a little bit?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Hopefully that will do it. Seems like streaming's been a little slow lately. I apologize. Okay.
No worries at
So
all.
let's get into deliverables. Yep. Is it okay? Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Go ahead. We'll
Okay.
jump in if there's any issues, but it sounds like I feel like you're coming in a little better, but I'll check with the other folks to see if there's any ongoing issues.
Okay, thank you, Aisha. So for applicants who are awarded the Connect and Protect award, there are a few deliverables that all awardees must complete. First, there's a two-phase process consisting of first planning and second implementation. For phase one, the planning phase, the grant recipient will receive intensive training and technical assistance from BJA's technical assistance partner. Under this phase, grantees follow a document called the Planning and Implementation Guide. The document is refined each year to meet the grantee's needs. As outlined in the solicitation, for up to 12 months after receiving final approval of the project's budget from OJP, grantees can spend up to $100,000 during the planning phase to work with the TTA provider on the P&I guide. That's the Planning and Implementation Guide, of course. And past grantees have found that the planning phase helps to prioritize where to begin in the implementation. And then the grantee would move to the second phase. And in the second phase, that's what we call the implementation phase. And that's where grantees begin after BJA approves the grantee's P&I guide, and well as complete their other special conditions. So once we approve the P&I guide, then the grantee can go ahead and begin the implementation phase. And that's when the rest of the money will be accessible to the grantee. So in the first 12 months, it's all about planning, and you're allowed up to $100,000 of your grant funds. Okay, on to slide 26. We'll continue with deliverables. So in addition, the awardee must also document the approach to implementing or enhancing law enforcement behavioral health responses for individuals with mental health or co-occurring mental health substance use disorders who come in contact with the criminal justice system. They must also collect data on program use, effectiveness, and outcomes, and analyze across different demographics. Conduct an evaluation of the PMHC and community satisfaction. And if the grantee chooses so, working with a researcher to collect program data is an allowable expense. Grantees can conduct an evaluation of a PMHC and community satisfaction and create a report on the survey results and make it into a brief and share it with the public. Next slide, 27. Okay, more deliverables as well. All right. Engage in regular training and technical assistance activities with BJA's training and technical assistance partner to include completion of the planning and implementation guide and any other offerings that the TTA coaches are providing. BJA expects that the grantee will participate in TTA. And outline a plan for obtaining the necessary support to sustain and continue the proposed collaboration program following the conclusion of the federal support. And that's where TTA is really super huge important, because they can help a lot with sustainability plans. Next slide. So the Office of Justice Programs, of which the Bureau of Justice Assistance is a part, weighs many factors when making funding decisions. This includes, but is not limited to, giving priority consideration to applications that meet the following criteria. Supporting Executive Order 13985, which is about advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities through the federal government. And also, to receive this consideration, the applicant must describe how the proposed projects will address potential inequities and barriers to equal opportunity and/or contribute to greater access to services for underserved and historically marginalized populations. And BJA will also give priority consideration to rural communities. So it's really important if you're going to address these priority areas that you do talk about it in the abstract and the narrative. So we'll continue on to the next slide and talk about program-specific priority areas. So the program-specific areas are to promote effective strategies to reduce the risk of harm to people with mental health disorders or co-occurring mental health and substance use disorders who encounter law enforcement. Also, by promoting effective strategies for the identification and treatment of women who have been incarcerated with mental health and co-occurring mental health and substance use disorders. And also to propose interventions that have been shown by empirical evidence to reduce recidivism. When appropriate, use validated screening and assessment tools to target people who are incarcerated with a moderate or high risk of recidivism and a need for treatment services. And although I realize this is a law enforcement program, those are the legislated priority areas, so it is inclusive of people who are incarcerated. So to receive priority consideration under any of these areas, applicants must identify in the proposal abstract, just as I mentioned, in each area for which the priority consideration is being sought, and describe in the proposal narrative how they will be addressed in how each priority area will be addressed. So 2 places that we need to see the priority mentioned. One in the abstract, what it is that you're considering and how you're going to, and then in the narrative, actually how you're going to address it. Okay, next slide. Okay, so there is an anticipated total of 30 awards that we're looking to award. And each awardee receives up to $550,000 for a 36-month, 3-year project, which is expected to begin on the federal fiscal year, as you know, October 1 of 2023. And so now this year, we're going to talk a little bit about the budget, just to help give applicants a little bit of an idea on how they need to structure their budget. And I'm going to transition now to my colleague, Tammy Lovell, who's from the programs office here at BJA, and she's super about helping around budget issues and challenges, and I'm going to hand it over to Tammy. Thanks, Tammy.
Thank you, Maria. Next slide. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the budget information. The budget should be complete, cost-effective, and allowable. All costs should be reasonable, allocable, and necessary for project activities. Remember, as mentioned before, only up to $100,000 of funding will be available to complete the planning phase in the first 12 months of the project. The budget should clearly indicate the cost for the planning phase. Next slide. Now I want to cover some unallowable costs. There are several costs that are not allowed with the grant funding. Connect and Protect does not support or fund construction. Additionally, prizes, rewards, entertainment, trinkets, or any other monetary incentives, such as client stipends, gift cards, vehicle purchases, and food or beverages. Those are all unallowable costs. Finally, the use of BJA funds for an unmanned aircraft systems, or UAS, including unmanned aircraft vehicles, such as a UAV, and all accompanying accessories to support the UAS or UAV is also unallowable. Next slide. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the match requirements. I know this is an important topic. This award requires a non-federal match in the amount of 20% total project costs for project years 1 and 2, and then 40% in project year 3. The match can be in the form of cash or in-kind match, such as a third-party match, which is allowable. Next slide. Cost sharing or match requirements continued. In some, federal match may not cover more than, in some, federal funds may not cover more than 80% of the total cost of the project being funded in years 1 and 2, or 60% in year 3, applicants must identify the source of the non-federal portion of the funding and indicate how these funds will be used. Match costs in the budget must meet the same guidelines as the federal costs for being allowable, reasonable, allocable, and necessary for the project. In other words, if you have federal funds that are unallowable, then those match funds, they are also would be unallowable. It is recommended that you do not include excessive match over the minimum requirements in the application budget. Next slide. For clarification in the difference between a subaward versus procurement contracts, please carefully review the OJP Grant Application Resource Guide for additional information, which is linked in the solicitation, subsection titled Information on Proposed Subawards, if any are planned, and proposed procurement contracts, again, if any are planned, and the resources linked therein to ensure that you properly categorize your cost in each of these sections. There are different administrative requirements related for each. For example, a procurement contract requires full and open competition, while a subaward does not. Next slide. Now I want to turn to talking through the application criteria. Next slide. Let's talk a little bit about the application and submission information. The information on this slide and the next must be included in all application submissions for an application to meet the basic requirements to advance to peer review and receive consideration for funding. We've also included where each document should be completed and submitted. Next slide. Additional application components, as well as the information listed here. Please note that applicants are not required to submit performance data with the application. Rather, performance measures information is included as an alert that successful applicants will be required to submit performance data as part of their reporting requirements under the award. Also, an applicant that proposed to use award funds to conduct project evaluations must follow the guidance under Note on Project Evaluations under the OJP Grant Application Resource Guide. Next slide. Applications that meet the basic minimum requirements will be reviewed by reviewers. Applications will be reviewed on how the proposed project or program address the following criteria, and each criteria is weighed as 15% for the state of the problem or description of issue, 40% for the project design and implementation, 30% for the capabilities and competencies, 5% for the data collection and performance measurement plan, and finally, 10% for your budget. Next slide. I will now briefly highlight the submission requirements. Next slide. Applications must be submitted to DOJ in a two-step process. Step 1, applicants must submit an SF-424 and an SF-LLL in grants.gov by 8:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on April 24th, 2023 at the referenced link. Please note, to register in grants.gov, applicants will need to obtain a unique entity identifier, or a UEI, and the system award for management, registration, or renewal. Just a side note, the UEI has replaced the DUNS number. Step 2, applicants must also submit the full application, including attachments in Just Grant, by 8:59 Eastern Standard Time on May 1st, 2023 at the referenced link. All applicants are encouraged to review the How to Apply section in the OJP Grant Application Resource Guide. OJP urges applicants to submit applications at least 72 hours prior to the application due date to allow for the application to receive validation messages or rejection notifications from grants.gov to correct in a timely fashion any problems that may have caused a rejection notification. Next slide. Some tips to prevent these issues. The next 3 slides highlight tips to prevent these issues. Number 1, remember there is a 2-step process for submission. Be clear on the deadline for each process and reference the How to Apply section of the OJP Grant Application Resource Guide. Next slide. Registration. Before submitting an application, all applicants must register with the System for Award Management, SAM. You must also renew or validate your registration every 12 months. If you do not renew your registration in sam.gov, it will expire. An expired registration can delay or prevent application submission in grants.gov and Just Grants. Registration and renewal can take up to 10 business days to complete. Next slide. Make sure to submit by the grants.gov deadline and submit the SF424 and SFLLL as early as possible, but no later than 48 hours before the grants.gov deadline. If you need assistance with this process, contact the grants.gov customer service hotline. Next slide. Make sure to submit the full application, including all attachments to Just Grants by the application deadline. For technical assistance with the application, contact the Just Grants service desk. Thank you for attending the webinar, and now I'm going to turn things back over to Aisha.
Thank you so much, Tammy. And thank you to Maria and Ernie also for presenting. Right now, what we're going to do is start the question and answer portion. And I'm going to start working through the questions in the Q&A. Sorry, guys, I'm going to adjust my computer here. So, let's see. First question I have is actually more of a comment, which this I think is in reaction to the definition of mental health and co-occurring substance use conditions. And Maria, I think you might want to talk a little bit about some of BJ's work in this space. But there's a comment about it's critical to start including people with autism in these definitions as they have similar difficulties in the community: homelessness, alienation from family, poverty, food insecurity, and a high rate of victimization. And contact with law enforcement is not uncommon. So I want to just thank the person for raising that. And Maria, do you want to talk about some of BJA's work in that space or comment on that?
Sure. Thank you so much for that comment. We totally agree with you. And what we're doing is we're working in that space in a number of different ways. One is another program that is, it's not this program, but although this program, I'll talk about that in a second. But through our academic initiative, which is really, it's legislated to address the needs of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in law enforcement response. So we just recently launched a brand new curriculum. It's based on a crisis response and intervention training curriculum. And it is, I'll have to get the link in the chat. It's, Aisha, if you want to drop it in there, it's informedpoliceresponses.com. So that will link you to the academic initiative. And specifically, in the 5-day, 40-hour training curriculum, we specifically did something that hadn't been done before, which is to actually incorporate the needs of how we respond to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, as well as people with mental health disorders. And people, we also know that people have co-occurring mental health and other types of developmental disabilities. So that's one initiative where we're really working in that space. JMHCP and Connect and Protect, because Connect and Protect is a carve out of JMHCP, and they come from the same legislation. It's very specific, it's very prescriptive, and it doesn't really get into the needs of specifically of people with developmental disability. But I can tell you, out in the field and in the real world, it's exactly how you describe it. You know, law enforcement respond to people, whoever's before them, and you know, a lot of times there's lots of things present, co-occurring things present, and so we're always providing resources, even through this program, and training, and providing briefs. And we have a number of briefs on responding to people with intellectual and developmental disability. We just automatically weave it in because it's just necessary to do so in order to equip first responders as they're out in the field and responding to these calls, because it just wouldn't be unrealistic not to. I hope that helps answer the question.
Yes, thank you very much, and thanks to the commenter for raising it. One other question, I think, Maria, this is also one you can answer. Is there a place where the definition of mental health agency and what's eligible is written down? I know certainly we will have these slides available in the PowerPoint. Is there anywhere else people should look?
I believe it's in the legislation itself, in the 21st century cures, and also in the reauthorizing language that was just passed in December of 2022. But we'll be sure to find that.
Okay, great. So at that link for the legislation. Great, thank you. This is a question about eligibility. And just so folks know, I'm going through the questions that are in the Q&A section first. I see there's some questions coming through in the chat. I'll jump over to look at those, but you can definitely use the Q&A box if you see that for your questions. The next question is, what if we are a law enforcement agency, a city law enforcement agency that also employs a behavioral health professional for co-response to mental health services? Would we qualify for this grant? I think I can give the short answer, which is that that does sound like this person would be eligible, given that they are talking about a city agency with mental health services. Maria, would you like to provide additional context there?
I think that is the short answer. Yes, I think you have to check a few things. One, as an applicant, you have to be state or a local government entity or tribal government entity in order to apply. So the applicant agency has to be governmental. If you do apply under other, then you've got to be a designee of the state as a mental health provider. And then the second part of that is that it has to be a partnership, and it has to be a partnership between a criminal justice entity and a behavioral health entity. So if you've got that, you're good to go. There are some nuances around embedded clinicians in a law enforcement department, only because it depends if they're from a behavioral health organization and they're just contracted and housed inside a law enforcement agency, or they're actually in the operational budget for the law enforcement agency. Those kinds of things. That part, you're still satisfying the partnership. It doesn't really matter in that regard. It's more that's more about the applicant agency and things like that. But it's still a partnership, and you still have both the criminal justice and the behavioral health partnership. Yes.
Thank you so much, Maria.
Yeah.
The next question is also about eligibility, and I think I'm interpreting this one correctly, but are 911 centers that are implementing alternative response programs where they're having a mental health program, a mental health person respond, and that mental health person is separate from the police department, would they be eligible? That sounds to me like it's a similar definition to what we were talking about when you were talking about the community responder program. So it sounds like this is a question about those types of programs. Maria, would you like to talk through that eligibility?
Sure. So, certainly you're eligible to apply. I think the applicant agency just ensure that it's the governmental agency that it's applying, because they're the ones that are eligible to apply. You've got the partnership in place. If you've got clinicians responding, or they're inside the 911 dispatch center, or 911 is maybe moving the calls over to a clinician. It could be more like a community responder. and you're still in partnership with that justice entity, so you've kind of checked that block, it sounds like you're totally eligible.
Thank you. And then the next question is about the prioritization of rural areas. So can you speak more specifically to the prioritization of rural areas? Our project could potentially focus on a geographic segment of an urban area, which would be of a similar size as a rural area. Will our grant submission be at a disadvantage as it's reviewed? So if someone's not specifically focusing on a rural area in the classical sense, is their submission at a disadvantage as it's reviewed? Maria, would that be
say that yeah, I don't think they would be at a disadvantage. It sounds like maybe you know, you're trying to target a geographic area that's considered rural, maybe in the sense that they don't have the resources and they're like a segment of this community that maybe historically doesn't have the capacity to respond and treat people. Maybe it doesn't meet the actual definition. We did put a definition in the solicitation just as guidance. So you can click on those links and get guidance. But if it doesn't fit exactly with that guidance, you can still in your narrative, you know, really make a strong argument and have a really strong application. I don't think it takes away if it doesn't exactly fit the definition of rural.
Yeah. And is it also fair to say that, you know, I know we have a number of grantees that are from urban areas, suburban areas. People put in strong applications that are for non-rural communities, and they also do get funded as well.
Yep.
So next question. For law enforcement agencies wishing to establish a co-responder program, are they limited to offering those services to individuals who are already designated as a preliminarily qualified offender? In other words, can we use these funds to provide services to individuals who we have not yet had contact with? And Maria, I know this is a question you get all the time and one you've thought about a lot.
Yeah, this gets a little bit tricky. So, you know, these funds are designated really for people who tend to revolve in and out of the criminal justice system because, you know, maybe they don't have a diagnosis, they were never connected to treatment, there's low level offenses involved, and it puts them in contact with law enforcement. And that's really, you know, it's the people that sort of fall into that bucket that these funds are intended for. Although, you know, philosophically, we would love to move it upstream where, you know, let's help people before they make contact with the criminal justice system. I mean, that's kind of like the idea as well. So, you know, so what do you do? And so what we have to kind of fall back on is the legislation, because there's a lot of people out there in need of treatment and in need of connections to treatment. And, you know, if you were a community responder program and you were funded with these funds and you were out there, I mean, you might be responding to somebody who needs help, but for the purpose of this program, it's really not the general public who needs mental health treatment isn't really the target population. The target population falls kind of in between. They're people with mental health conditions who tend to come in contact with the criminal justice system, and usually that's through 911 or could be through 988, could be through just an officer out responding, maybe to an ordinance or a homeless camp or something like that, but something that's going to put criminal justice somewhere on the scene.
Great, thank you. The next series of questions is really about, is it possible to, I think it's about maybe the next 3 questions or so, is it possible to use this funding to expand or enhance a current co-response model that already exists? Or is this just for launching new co-response models or other interventions? I'll give the quick answer there, and then Maria will definitely jump in. I know that the funding under Connect and Protect can be used to either expand or enhance existing models as well as start new models as well. So you can do both, or one or the other. But Maria, anything else you'd like to add there?
No, I think that's perfect.
Okay, looking for that. Could we get the slide deck ASAP? We will do our very best to get this up as soon as possible, as well as the recording. And the solicitation itself is also, I know, very dense, but has all of this information written in a different way. So also a very good resource, but we'll definitely try to get this out ASAP. The next one's about eligibility. Are state correctional entities able to apply to train staff within our correctional facilities to work better with people with mental health conditions or mental health and co-occurring substance use conditions in correctional settings? So Maria, I think that I'll call you up to answer this, and I think I'll also go ahead and drop the JMHCP link in the chat while you're responding as well.
Sure. So yeah, I see that type of project could go either way. Definitely, we try to focus JMHCP on people that are like in the criminal justice system and moving their way through to reentry, of course. But I do understand what you're saying in terms of, having correctional officers, more or less like a kind of like a crisis response team inside a correctional facility, if that's what you're kind of getting at, to respond to people in mental health crisis. And we know agencies that are doing that. And in that sort of sense, it is like a response, and it could be appropriate for this program as well. I think it could go either way. And matter of fact, the program that I mentioned earlier, the academic initiative, and that is through the National Policing Institute now, is actually going to further develop the curriculum that I mentioned, specifically building out, matter of fact, in FY23, they are building out resources specifically for correctional officers and community corrections in responding to this population. So because it's a little bit different on the inside, right, than out in the community. So we have tools and products on the way.
That's great. And just for your reference again, for everyone in the room, I did drop both the JMHCP and the Connect and Protect solicitations in the chat. Definitely, as you're considering what you're applying for, take a look at both of them. They're similar, but as Maria's saying, like there's similarities and there's overlap. So you could be eligible for one or both of them. So just want to make sure you have both. And just to also, we did do a solicitation webinar for that one yesterday. Similarly, those slides and this the recording will be available as well on our website. Next question. If we only need 6 months of planning, can we opt for a shorter planning time before implementation? Maria.
Sure. So we allow up to 12 months planning, and we try, as soon as your budget's approved, we like you to get through that planning phase as soon as possible so that you can go ahead and begin implementation. But sometimes it does take a while to get budgets approved. It can take up to 2 months after. So, but we'll of course work with you on that. We want to make sure you don't lose time, and there's always extensions and things like that. So, you'll have plenty of time to implement. But if you finish the planning period sooner and your TA coach is happy with that at the Justice Center and they provide your plan to me and I'm happy with it, we're going to sign you off and get you on your way.
Great. Yes, we definitely try to work with people at the pace that they're going, and of course help and not slow folks down. The next question is, can you elaborate on what the data for program outcomes means? And this is, I think, the data that folks would be reporting after they've gotten the award. Maria, can I turn that to you?
Yeah, so we are in the midst right now of actually looking at the performance data. It's very quantitative right now. It's like the numbers of people encountered, the numbers of people connected to treatment, things like that. But I'd be happy to collect that report up and share it with you. But I think there's also a link to the report, the performance data, in the solicitation. So you can take a look at it there, and you'll see the types of questions that are asked. We're just trying to show impact And you can also, there's other ways you can show impact through just the training and technical assistance that CSG provides. You know, they're going to work with you on basically data fields that really show impact on, you know, reduced uses of force, numbers of people connected to treatment, people that, you know, just different ways to show impact. So they'll work with you on that, because that's really a big part of sustainability planning as well.
Yes, and I do just want to emphasize that we do really work with your grant. If you become a grantee, we work with you to make sure that you can report on your program outcomes. So even if you're unsure about that, we can support that and make sure that you are meeting that deliverable. Next one, we've answered this. Would expanding a current program be considered, or just implementation? Expansion and implementation both are things that are funded under this solicitation. And then this question, 30 awards across what geographic area? Oh, I think this is asking of the 30 awards that will be made, across what geographic area could they be? And I think the simple answer is that they are for Department of Justice funds across the entire United States. But Maria, do you want to give any additional context on that?
Yeah, across, it's nationally and U.S. territories as well. That can apply.
And I think the only prioritization was the rural prioritization. There aren't other geographic prioritizations to consider.
No, that was the only one. Mm-hmm.
Yes to the PowerPoint and presentation being available for download. Absolutely. And then this question, I think we did answer this a little bit, but Maria, I think it's helpful to go through it a little bit more, just in case, because I think this is a nuance that can be hard to get your head around. This question is, it sounds like this solicitation is geared more towards co-response teams and patrol, and not so much the jails. Am I correct in this? And I think we want to make sure that people understand that this is relatively broad, but Maria, can I send it to you to respond?
Sure. So overall, generally, the funding is authorized to provide, you know, programmatic funding in the form of grants across the entire criminal justice system. So from first contact to jails, to pre-trial, to courts, and then reentry, community corrections. And we've actually had to ramp up this year for prosecutors, because sometimes they don't even see themselves in GMHCP, but truly, like, prosecutors, defense, all along the entire criminal justice and out in the community, like services in form of behavioral health partners. So the entire criminal justice continuum. But what we did was we broke off Connect and Protect and sort of carved it out as a program, a standalone program all to itself, because we realized that if we put a large amount of resources in training and technical assistance at the front end of the system, maybe we can prevent people with mental health disorders and co-occurring disorders from progressing further into the criminal justice system, because we know once they get in, it's really difficult for them to come out, and they lose a lot of what other types of treatment contacts in the community, and it's a little bit different than a general population. So we did that intentionally to create a standalone program. But so if you look to JMHCP is going to focus on like the booking, like people booking into jails and moving on through the system through to reentry. But then Connect and Protect is going to focus on the front end, potentially, you know, first contact with law enforcement. But it could, if you think about it like bookends on the other end of the system, it could potentially fund a partnership maybe with probation and parole on the other end, and, you know, officers, because they're sworn and they have powers of arrest, and maybe, you know, you look at it that way, it could fund something like that. So I say, you know, be creative, and you can use either program.
Great, thank you. The next question is, I think, Tammy, you might be best positioned to respond to this one, but after I submit the SF424 and the SFLLL, will I receive an email on next steps? So I think that's you, Tammy, but if not, let me know.
It would be. I do not believe that they will receive an email. I just cannot recall if an automated email goes out to them. But after they submit those two documents via grants.gov, then they should work on submitting, they're getting their application documents together, and they get submitted through Just Grants itself. And if they have any questions or need additional information on that, they should definitely utilize the resource guide.
Great, thank you. This next one I think is also for you. On the budget, are years 2 and 3 required to have a specific percentage of the budget? For example, can both years have equal budgets, or can year 2 have a larger budget than year 3?
So there's no specific outline on the percentage of the budget. What is required is that you have to meet the match requirement per year. For years 1 and 2, the match requirement is 20%, which means you can either do 20% for year 1 and 20% for year 2, or you can do 20% for a combination of years 1 and 2. And then year 3 is, you kind of got to look at that separate, because that is a 40% match of years 3's budget.
That's great. That's great. This one is about eligibility. So Maria, I think you can, you've spoken to this a little, you've spoken to this before, but I think it bears repeating. Would like some clarification on what defines a mental health organization. Specifically, our city police department has hired a social worker that is not funded by the county. Would our department be able to apply in this situation?
So it's really referring to, the legislation is referring to clinical treatment. There are like master level social workers that do provide clinical treatment. And Aisha, you probably could respond to that more than Aisha. Dr. Aisha is a trained psychiatrist, a psychologist. So yeah, but I mean, it depends on licensure. It depends on what the person is able to do, because it's about a partnership. One being the criminal justice expert and the other being the behavioral health expert, to be able to really provide direct treatment and services to that individual that you encounter. So it really falls on credentialing and skill set, and it really, I think even the laws in each state are varied, and who can do that and that sort of thing. But then again, just refer back to the legislation and the definition. I think the partnership piece is, as long as it's a person that's operating under somebody's license, but I think there has to be someone who's licensed. Yeah.
And one thing that you also mentioned yesterday, Maria, that I thought was really helpful was, in the case, obviously a city police department can apply for this award. They meet the criteria of being a unit of government. And that, like you're bringing up right now, the need to make sure there's a strong mental health partnership there. So there's, of course, some of the applications you get are for people, for agencies that have embedded people in their agency. But another thing that you often look for is other kinds of partnerships as well. Does the law enforcement department have a partnership with a community-based mental health provider, even if that person's not being funded through this, but as a way to share resources, to share referrals, so that if they're connected with someone who needs a type of service that their embedded clinician can't provide, that they have, they are able to hand that off. So those types of partnerships are also important for when you look at these solicitations. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, thank you so much for adding that. That's critically important to the success of a program. And, so that's part of it too, is, we want you to be set up for success. And if no one agency can take it on, and part and parcel why, justice and mental health has been successful over the years is because you'll have one agency that may have a lot of resources that the other does not. And by, two agencies coming together, or two organizations, you're partnering, you're leveraging, and that sort of thing, so that you're really expanding on what can be provided to the community. But yes, you nailed it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. The next question is just, the question is, how many applicants did you receive last year? I don't know, Maria or Tammy, if you know that off the top of your head.
I have to recall. I want to say between, because some of them, honestly, we usually get like around 70 to 75, but a lot gets screened out because, unfortunately, at basic minimum requirements, because they didn't attach, the basic minimums, which I would definitely use that checklist in the back of the solicitation. You provide that checklist just to run down, make sure you've got everything attached that's required. But I think after all that, maybe 50. So you've got a pretty good chance.
That's good to know. And also, I do really want to emphasize what Maria said. There's a very, very helpful checklist in the back of the solicitation of every single type of document you will need, and all the basic minimum requirements. So making sure you get through all those as you're submitting is very helpful. You don't want to get kicked out in that first round before your application's even able to be reviewed. That's always a shame. The next question is really about what the focus of Connect and Protect is. We already have a co-responder model in our department. Can we use funding for training within our department and attending various trainings, as well as enhancing peer support? And I'll get started on this, but Andrea, when you're on this, could you go to slide 21, which is the objectives? So I know we've been talking a lot about co-responder models, but I don't want folks in this virtual room to lose track or think we're just talking about this solicitation as funding co-response models. Connect and Protect grantees really stand up a whole range of different types of models that are done in partnership between their law enforcement and behavioral health. That includes building training models within their department. And this here is not meant to be a completely comprehensive list, but includes some examples of the types of initiatives that Connect and Protect has funded in the past. Maria, anything else there?
No, I'm so glad that you brought this slide back up, because I think co-responder teams are, pretty popular, and we hear a lot about that. But I also know many departments that actually use a multi-layered approach. They might have several different approaches, and they just layer them on just so that they have just different options for different situations. And of course, you can always use the funding for training.
Great. And then I know we have a slide that talks about the maximum amount of the award, but this question is just asking about the average amount of the award. So the maximum dollar amount is, of course, $550,000 over 36 months. But Tammy or Maria, do you happen to remember or have a sense of? I don't have the sense off the top of the average for each grant application.
I would say most people aim for the maximum award of 550, and that's what we've kind of set our sights on as far as like how many we can fund. So, but if that is not, if that is not within the capacity of your organization, I won't say that you have to do that. You can apply up to that. That depends on what you can manage.
And I think the next two questions kind of go together, but just want to emphasize this for folks. Am I understanding correctly? The primary grant application needs to be a government entity, and the sub-grantee should be the mental health organization, or does that primary or secondary matter? A similar question about eligibility is, are federally funded behavioral health agencies qualified partners? So if you could just review really quickly the primary eligibility, Maria?
Certainly. So the primary eligibility is state, tribal, local government entity, could be a city, could be a county. I would also add that if you are a county that has like a criminal justice board that serves as, you know, an entity, a government entity to apply on behalf of the county or the city, but it still has to go. It has to go back to being a government entity. And even if you apply, if you're a mental health organization and you apply under other, you have to be a designee of the state mental health authority. And I would encourage you to go back and look at that list of contacts for your state mental health authority if you're not sure, because so many communities have, you know, small nonprofits that provide direct services in the community, and they work very well with their local law enforcement agencies, and that's great. But you have to think about who should be the applicant, because if that nonprofit is not acting on behalf of the state, you know, you might want to think about the law enforcement entity being the applicant, because it's got to come from a governmental organization, either by designation or actually you are the governmental organization.
Great, thank you. Just watching time, so I want to try to get to as many of these questions as possible. Will the grant allow for hiring a new police officer and a mental health clinician? I know one of the allowable uses is for paying for staff. So that is certainly allowable to look to hire. And are there copies of successful applications available? We do have on the JMHCP website examples of grantees who have been successful, and I will drop that link in the chat shortly. If the applicant is a city or county government law enforcement authority, can there be two sub-grantees as partners? If one is a mental health agency with an existing partnership with law enforcement and the other is an ambulance service nonprofit. So can there essentially, or is it allowable to have two sub-grantees?
Oh, sure. I'll go ahead and take that. You have many partners. It's, you know, you're only required to partner, you know, one criminal justice entity and one behavioral health entity, but you can have many partners and sub-grantees, but only can be one applicant. That's the main thing. Just one applicant.
Primary applicant and multiple sub-grantees is fine.
Yeah.
Great. Let's see. We have a follow-up on the preliminary qualified question. Our co-responder model is designed to service individuals with mental health disorders, but asking whether or not they have to be in the system already. In our city, we have a large unhoused population, a larger percentage of which have mental health or substance use disorders. We frequently respond to calls for service related to those individuals, but we may or may not have already had contact with them. Would these funds be appropriately used when responding to these types of calls for service? Maria, do you want to take that?
Sure. So they don't have to be in the, in the criminal justice system already at all. You might be responding to, something around an ordinance or something, or an alleged offense or something like that. Something that puts law enforcement there, but no, they don't have to be. And so many people with mental health conditions have never had, any contact at all. And, so no, not at all.
That's great. And this question, I think this is probably best for you, Tammy, but Maria, you might also want to jump in. If we're using funds to expand an existing program, do we still have to designate 100,000 during the first 12 months, which is the planning period?
Yes, you do. Yes. The requirement of the award is that you have to develop a planning and implementation guide that you will work with your TTA provider at CSG on developing.
Yep, and that's legislated, by the way, that a planning phase must take place. So we designated $100,000 for planning. So planning would include things like, and you'll have a guide that'll take you through this and a TA coach that'll take you through this, but it's really a dynamic plan. It changes, from the time, you start to along the way, you can make changes, but it's your roadmap to implementation. And planning activities include things like stakeholder convenings. Maybe you want to do sequential intercept mapping with your community partner. Maybe you want to, do some type of focus group or something like that with the community. So lots goes into planning. And by the time you're done with your planning and implementation guide, then you've got a solid plan to move forward.
Great. And I'm going to jump around a little bit to get to some of the budgeting questions and try to circle back on some of the other ones. So one question is, can grant funds be used to provide client supportive services such as hotel vouchers for temporary housing, medication costs, etc.? So I think this is asking about allowable costs. Tammy, would you be able to respond?
Sure. Yes, they would. I definitely would have them review the unallowable cost via the DOJ financial guide or the resource guide for the application, but those costs that you just mentioned would be allowable.
Great. And there's a question here, are grantees to use the grant dollars to pay the training vendor for the cost of the training and technical assistance with the $100,000? I think if this question is asking whether or not grantees need to pay the Council State Government's Justice Center for the training and technical assistance that we provide to grantees, the answer is no. We are funded directly by the Bureau of Justice Assistance, so none of your grant dollars come to us for that work. Here's a good question. If we applied to both Connect and Protect and the Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program, could an agency be awarded both? Maria.
Okay. So I would say if that is something that you're going to do, would want to ensure that they are very different projects and that they complement one another. Because, as we stated earlier, we wouldn't take the same two applications from the same, the exact same application from the same entity. So if you're applying for a certain risk to train on a certain response model or bring staff on, law enforcement or behavioral health partners on to respond to people, and then your behavioral health partner is going to partner with you to apply on the JMHCP side for maybe a crisis stabilization center or drop-in center or something like that, that's going to help you. So when you respond, you have a place to bring people. That would make sense to me if I read those two applications. I'd be like, okay, they're working together and they're coordinating here. But if it were the same application on both sides, then I would have to question. Yeah, that wouldn't work. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. Tammy, there's a question here about, can fringe benefits be included as part of salaries in the proposed budget, like for retirement insurance, et cetera?
Yes, that would be allowable. However, when you're creating your budget, there is a budget category for both personnel, and then there's a budget category for fringe. So you want to take the fringe benefits out of the actual personnel cost and put them in the correct category.
Thank you. And another budget question, can the funds be used to lease a car for the civilian for response, for the civilian who would be responding to a crisis call? So I think the question is, can the funds be used to lease a car?
Yes, that is allowable. They just cannot use funds to purchase a vehicle, but a lease or a rental, something like that, yes, that will be fine.
And the next question is there any required travel or potential out-of-state training costs to be budgeted for? Maria, do you want to talk about this?
Sure. Could you repeat the question? You broke up a little bit.
Oh, sorry. The question was, is there any required travel or potential out-of-state training costs to be budgeted for?
We didn't put that in solicitation, but I was thinking about training costs as we were answering one of the other questions. And I was just thinking, Aisha, about the 14 law enforcement mental health learning sites. And I was thinking about the planning process, and that might be something that that applicants for this program might want to consider as part of their planning. Maybe they would like to visit one of our peer-to-peer learning sites to learn more about a certain response or policies, written policies, or other types of approaches. So maybe you can add to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I know, as you said, there isn't anything that's required in terms of travel, but certainly we do have resources, and I'll drop drop in the chat the law enforcement mental health learning sites, which are 14 best practice sites around the country who've stood up best practice responses to people who have behavioral health conditions, who are at risk of or who have had contact with law enforcement, and they are available for you to visit, to talk to on the phone. I see we have the Harris County Sheriff's learning site on the phone. Great to see you all. They're really a fantastic set of agencies. And so one of the things you can budget for is funding for your team to travel or to do one of those site visits or other types of training. We definitely encourage people to learn from their peers. So I think that's it's not required, but is a really great use of funds and one way to really enhance your program. Looking, another question on the budget. I think Tammy, this would go to you. Can matching funds include existing funding for CIT training, for example, or does it need to be new funds raised new for this application and implementation? Or is another example, a mental health court that already exists that is funded but will participate to gain data on and outcomes, et cetera?
Sure. So yes, you can use an existing position that you have for matching funds. You don't have to create something new to use match dollars with. However, you have to tie those dollars to the project directly. They have to be doing something to complement the project, enhance the project, etc.
Great, great. Okay, I'm looking at, we've got the last 3 minutes. I'm going to circle back on some of the eligibility questions that are coming through, just to make sure we're giving, providing that. So let's see. This question is, I work for a for-profit mental health, well, MHR, assuming that's a mental health response, and also for a 501c3, a nonprofit. We both work as community partner with behavioral health courts, drug courts, etc. We also work with juveniles who are detained in custody and detention centers for extended period of time. Would this be something that we could utilize to grow our program? So it sounds like this is a provider who works both with drug courts, with their Department of Justice, and behavioral health courts, all of that. They are a for-profit, also a nonprofit. Maria, do you want to talk about the nuances of that?
Sure. So I could definitely see you as a partner on this project in providing these services as a critical partner, I might add, because, necessary. If you are considering actually being an applicant as a nonprofit or a for-profit, you would be coming in under that other category, which means that you would have to provide documentation that you are a government entity or acting as on behalf of the state mental health authority with documentation to that designation.
Great. And last one in the last minute, if the county is applying for a county sheriff and county social workers, if the county is applying for county sheriff and county social workers, could the city also apply if they partner with the county? Or is that considered a duplicate entry from the county? So I guess the question is, if the county is submitting 2 different applications with 2 different sets of partners, is that, I think I'm reading that correctly.
Sure. So I wouldn't be as concerned about the partners, because it sounds like if you're all kind of in the same neighborhood, you might have very similar partners and they might cross-sect between projects for sure, especially with stakeholder groups and things like that. But the more important thing would be like, if one application was from the city and one application was from the county, that's two different entities. So I wouldn't be concerned about having similar subgrantees or partners. I'd be looking at, are they two different applicant entities? And are they, two different projects from two different applicant entities? If they were the same exact project, one from the city and one from the county, then I might have to go with the peer review scores and things like that, other things, just to determine. But if they're different, then that's fine.
Great. So I know we still have some questions. Unfortunately, we are out of time. We will be posting this webinar and slides. You see our contact information here on this slide. And then, of course, in addition, you can reach out to the Just Grants and grants.gov for their support on the technical questions around submitting your application. So thank you all. We're really hopeful about being able to work with you next year. Also, just in general, if you'd like to learn more about this type of work, you can sign up for the newsletter, and please do reach out as well. Thank you all.